Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wisdom Nutrition Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to finish off the chapter that we've been analyzing from my book, The Coming World Nation. It's called Technocracy, Government in the Scientific Age. And we have two sections that we're going to cover today. One of them is called Technocracy's Hub and Spoke Model. And that's going to be looking more at the actual organizational structure and the dynamics of how technocracy has emerged and how it is designed to function. And specifically, we're going to focus on the idea that technocracy, the organizational model of technocracy, has to be centered around a think tank or a scientific apparatus that can do the analyzing and data processing, much like the brain does in the nervous system. So technocracy really means designing a form of government that integrates science and technology right at the foundation of it in a way that the current paradigm of nation states, not just in America, but across the world, they don't incorporate science and technology explicitly into their governance systems. We need to design a new form of government and a new form of economics that is capable of leveraging science and technology in a fundamental way. So there's different visions for how it could look and different models of what it might look like, and those are up for debate and argument. But what's not really up for debate, and it's just really a sociological fact, is that over the past 150 years, science and technology have become a fundamental part of human life, and so we need a governance system that is capable of responding to that new capacity in a much more dynamic way than the form of government that we have now. So for me, this move towards technocracy is not innately good or bad. It can be done well. It can be also done harmful. It really depends on the quality of government and the quality of leaders that we have. And I'm reminded of a quote by Plato where he said, "Any form of government can be good as long as the leadership is good, but no form of government can be good as long as the leadership is bad." Plato also, his vision of society was not saying specifically one type of government system must work. It's more like we need to train the leadership class to think like philosophers. And then the ideal form of government should emerge naturally out of the wise leadership and wise counsel of leaders who are philosophers. So that was his idea of the philosophic empire. And I think that those ideas can all be incorporated into technocracy, and we could have a much higher version of this new form of government than what may appear at the moment. But right now, the move towards technocracy, at least on the surface, the aspect of it that we're able to see, like the Great Reset, for example, the leadership class that is driving that use of science and technology for government is very materialistic. It's very egocentric. It has a lot of feudalistic tendencies left over from the Middle Ages. So we shouldn't be surprised that we have this very negative transhumanist totalitarian expression of technocracy, because that's an expression of the psychology and the state of spiritual maturity of the leadership class that we have. So again, no form of government can work if the leadership isn't good. So right now we have capitalism and democracy. They don't function for the people. They don't function well because the leadership class is not good. The society we have today, the challenges that we have today, and the fact that we already have these extremely advanced technological systems already in place and we're very dependent on them, those things require us to not just fall back on past tendencies or the great ideas of people long ago, but we actually need to fashion great ideas today. We need to take the ideals and principles of the past and apply them to our present moment. And so we don't need to just recognize the greatness of the philosophers and thinkers of the past and the founding fathers of our system of government and of people like Plato, but we need a new cohort of that same quality of leader. And the only way we're going to get that is by having a philosophical renaissance, because philosophy creates those leaders. A philosophical renaissance is the only solution forward. The problems that we have can only be addressed with a philosophical approach. And likewise, the opportunities that are waiting to be seized can only be realized through the discipline and the intelligence and wisdom that comes with living the philosophic life, as they say. So we desperately need a philosophic renaissance. Returning back to the question of this current episode, we're going to be looking at two sections. Then these will finish off the chapter, Technocracy in the Scientific Age. And the first section is going to be looking at it's called the hub and spoke model of technocracy. And it's going to be looking at the organizational dynamics that technocracy requires. Specifically, it requires a central scientific analysis center or a think tank to process the information and data. And so we're going to be discussing that. And then the last section that we're going to be discussing from the chapter, which is pretty short, it's called the International Rules-Based Order. And this is a feature of our current geopolitical environment. But it really emerged after World War II. On the surface, it's a meeting ground of nation states to come together and make decisions. But actually, it's in practice, it's an expression of the American empire. It's the soft power expression of American empire. But this has also been the breeding ground, this international rules-based order. It's also the stage where much of the gradual, covert, quiet re-engineering of the global system is being taken place. And it's in the international rules-based order that this motion towards technocracy, you can really track it, and you can see the consolidation of this new system as it prepares to take over for capitalism. Before we jump into that, I want to make an announcement that starting on Wednesday, November 26th, which is the day that this episode is coming out, stretching for a couple weeks, I'll be having a sale on my Big Cartel store, which is thewisdomtradition.bigcartel.com. You can also access it from my website, www.alexsakin.com. And I'll be having a sale on all my books, and I'll sign them all. So if you order from me, then you'll get a signed copy of the book. I'll have my 3 books: The Coming World Nation, Manly P. Hall, The Maestro of Esoteric Philosophy, and 10 Essential Lectures by Manly P. Hall, abridged, annotated, and with commentary. And I'll also have merch. I have my have a Rosicrucian shirt and hat. And I also have a new shirt I'll be dropping, which has imagery or kind of artwork featuring Carl Jung and Stanislav Grof. It's a long sleeve white t-shirt, and it says Psychology, the Science of the Soul on the side. So that'll be available. I made that shirt years ago. I've had it for a while. I just never put it out. It was originally meant to come out with the publication that was on Carl Jung and Stanislav Grof. I actually don't have any more physical copies of that. I've been meaning to get it up on Amazon, but I've been working on other projects, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet. So eventually I do want to get that up because I think it was an important publication. But the t-shirt will be available. This limited edition, I think I only have like 20 or 25 of these in different sizes. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be the only chance you'll get to get these if they come out. There won't be another run of them. So if you have been a listener on the channel and you want to support my work, please pick something up at the sale. I've also added a donations button to my website, and you can also send me a donation there if you like, or also you can subscribe to my Substack, which is where it's kind of like the home base for all my writing and operations. And that's at thewisdomtradition.substack.com. It's $7 a month, and you get PDFs of all my books. And eventually, in the next couple months, I am going to do a series of podcasts that'll be just for the paid subscribers. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Again, we're going to be analyzing technocracy, government in the scientific age, and looking at particularly the organizational dynamics that technocracy requires in order to function. So if you haven't listened to the other episodes, go back and listen to those and catch up, and then you can join me with what we're about to jump into. So stay tuned. Okay, let's begin. This section, once again, is called Technocracy's Hub and Spoke Model. Now, just to recap what we went through in previous sections of this series, there was 2 different technocracy movements. One of them is esoteric and completely hidden. This has to do with the secret backstory of the UFO program and the emergence of a now classified science of etheric energy. So we know very little about that earlier esoteric technocracy group, which almost certainly didn't use the name technocracy, but would have been dealing with the same issues of governance that the 1930s technocracy movement would have been dealing with, which is how do we design a society that features science and technology at a fundamental level, but even more so in which economic organization is premised around the measure and optimization of energy use. So both versions of technocracy, esoteric and exoteric, are dealing with this idea of a governance system based around energy. The difference is that the 1930s technocratic movement, Their concept of energy and their concept of physics and science is based on an exoteric or public-facing system of science, which is a closed system. The esoteric version of technocracy would be trying to formulate a system of government based around energy, but their concept of energy is much different. It's based on an open system view of the ether, and the technologies that are able to tap into and wield the power of the ether, those are much different than the technologies that the 1930s technocratic movement was dealing with. So we have two distinct versions of technocracy, even though the earlier version, we don't know what they called their system of government that they would have been working with. But since it would have been based around the same ideas and principles that the latter group was working with, I think it's appropriate to call the earlier version, the esoteric version, also technocracy. It's just of a different variety, much different in outcome. Picking things back up. Behind the scenes of 20th century history, there has been a strong push for technocracy originating from within an unseen shadow dimension of the U.S. national security state. In a very patient and highly strategic manner, this concealed entity, for reasons of its own, has systematically worked to lay the groundwork for what will eventually become a mass exodus out of capitalism and into technocracy. Once the underlying architecture has been fully set up, the mysterious entity behind this project plans to deconstruct the global capitalist model and replace it with an entirely new technocratic operating system. So what I'm trying to say here is that behind the scenes of the 20th century is this dynamic taking place in which the capitalist system, which has many stakeholders in it and many powerful factions which are vested in the future of this capitalist system, it has been systematically undermined, and so it doesn't really have a long-term future. The capitalist system is being treated for decades as if it was something that they were going to abandon. And that's what you get with all the debt overhang and the trillions and trillions of debt. None of that stuff is ever designed to be fixed, or it really can be fixed, while keeping the legacy system intact. So what happens when you dismantle that? What's going to replace it? It's going to be this technocratic grid. At first glance, it'll look like we're going to get the exoteric technocracy of the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum. What I argue is that the hidden power structure with the secret science and technology will move in and take control over this technocratic paradigm. So what we'll actually get is esoteric technocracy. But the infrastructure that the exoteric technocrats have put into place is valuable and useful to the people who control the esoteric side of technocracy with the secret science and technology, because they can use that infrastructure to implement their own system, which has a different concept of energy and science behind it. So just to give a little bit of backstory, the mysterious entity behind this technocratic conspiracy existed well before the 1930s technocracy movement was founded. Like the 1930s technocrats, this original core foresaw a future beyond capitalism, a social order governed using a scientific and technological rationale. But unlike its 1930s counterparts, it was privy to the breakthrough technological possibilities of the ether, the universal field of atmospheric energy surrounding and enveloping the planet. I call this advanced technocratic entity the technocratic superstate. It is distinct from the 1930s technocratic movement, although the two share certain ideas and ambitions in common, namely the pursuit of a new science and technology-based system of government. The primary difference between them is that the 1930s technocrats were confined to a conventional understanding of physics and energy, while the technocratic superstate possessed a much more advanced understanding of these subjects, knowledge it has kept closely guarded. Once the foundations of the technocratic economy are fully set, the classified domains of etheric science and technology that the technocratic superstate has long kept secret will be revealed, and a global energy revolution will be instigated. This will be a carefully planned revolution, tightly orchestrated from the top down, with an elite think tank planning and implementing the entire operation. This think tank resides at the apex of the technocratic superstate's operational structure, with its directives implemented by an extensive operational network that extends out from its central hub. The technocratic superstate, whose operations are concealed deep within the most rarefied levels of the U.S. national security state, is the real mastermind behind the globe's gradual transition into technocracy, a process that is still ongoing. In its final stages, this process will involve the revelation and use of etheric energy, which will serve as the primary power source of the new technocratic economy. In the meantime, while this plan is patiently being implemented, the technocratic superstate must keep itself concealed, hidden away within the inner realms of the U.S. military-industrial complex. out of the reach of the deep state power factions that dominate its overt structure. So to conceal its existence and exert its influence in an unseen manner, which is done for over 100 years, I argue, the technocratic superstate takes advantage of the U.S. national security state's all-encompassing culture of secrecy and compartmentalization. In this divided information and communication environment, it is able to both mask its own existence while keeping the vital scientific and technological secrets it possesses away from power structures like the CIA and from oligarchical elites like the Rockefellers. The overall picture that emerges is one in which the U.S. national security state plays host to three different domains of operations. At the lowest level are the overt government institutions like the U.S. Navy. Above this are the deep state power factions that run the American empire. And at the highest level is the technocratic superstate with an elite think tank positioned at its center. The relationship dynamic between them flows from high to low. The technocratic superstate acts upon the deep state, which in turn acts upon the U.S. government. After World War II, for reasons we'll be exploring in future chapters, the technocratic superstate began to systematically infiltrate the power structures within the U.S. deep state and drive them into embracing an exoteric or outward-facing brand of technocracy, one premised upon the ideas of the 1930s technocrats, with the more advanced scientific and technological concepts of the technocratic superstate remaining concealed from their awareness, meaning etheric energy. The plan was to get the deep state. When I say deep state, I'm always talking about the outward structure of American empire, the oligarchy and its various branches, which is not governed by the overt nation state, the overt democratic institutions, but is governed by its own organizational managerial apparatus, and that's what we call the deep state. So the deep state is the concealed management structure behind the global American empire. The technocratic superstate, for strategic reasons, concealed itself behind this deep state. The plan was to get the deep state to begin incorporating technocratic elements into the design of its empire, incrementally infusing technocratic principles into the system of financial capitalism they used to manage the global American imperium. This wasn't a hard sell. The rapid growth in the importance of science and technology to society made the process of getting the deep state to begin embracing technocratic principles relatively easy. In other words, they would have had no choice but to begin embracing computers, digitization, the internet. These are all things that are actually supportive of this new technocratic environment. So these new features of capitalism are actually setting the stage for technocracy. And that's what I'm trying to say here. As an example of the type of logic that deep state strategists internalized in their road to embracing technocracy, consider Zbigniew Brzezinski's 1970 book, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. In this work, Brzezinski, an influential U.S. national security advisor, many of you are probably familiar with the name, argued that due to an increasing, quote, emphasis on science and learning, along with a rationalization of techniques and the introduction of new managerial computing and communication devices, he believed that modern society was moving inexorably in the direction of what he calls the technotronic era. Again, this was in 1970 that he was writing this. So this book is an example of exoteric technocratic thinking. And so he's advocating this exoteric technocratic position in 1970, and the ideas and stuff that he advocates for become embraced by the larger empire. So this was a motion that I think the esoteric side of technocracy took advantage of and began to support in its own covert way because it's part of its own strategic endgame. Brzezinski observed that modern societies, quote, less and less resemble a political hierarchy or a personal fiefdom, such as in medieval feudalism, but instead appear increasingly similar to a scientific undertaking, which not only produces what is known, but it systematically seeks to explore what is to come. His central thesis is that since long-term trends are pulling civilization towards science and technology, the public and private sector should work together to embrace this motion. Toward this end, Brzezinski worked alongside David Rockefeller to establish the Trilateral Commission in 1973, which since its founding has served as an influential vehicle for spreading the principles of technocracy worldwide. Again, exoteric technocracy. Brzezinski's conceptualization of technocracy is in alignment with the thinking of the 1930s technocrats, meaning it is quote-unquote exoteric, i.e. lacking knowledge of the ether and the profound advancements in technology it makes possible. By implication, the work Brzezinski did with the Trilateral Commission helped to spread exoteric technocracy with its esoteric counterpart confined to the technocratic superstate, i.e. the Black Project's underworld, which really became built out rapidly in America after World War II. So the World Economic Forum's infamous 2020 Great Reset campaign is a progression of Brzezinski's vision, meaning it is based on the exoteric concept of technocracy. Meanwhile, under the surface of this initiative, the technocratic superstate is continuing its preparations for a more profound global transition into esoteric technocracy, which will feature etheric energy as its lifeblood once it is fully implemented. The exoteric model of technocracy is the one most analysts point to in their research on technocracy, such as Patrick Wood, Ian Davis, Whitney Webb, and others. They all are dealing in their critiques with exoteric technocracy, which they don't realize there's an esoteric aspect as well, which is being developed exclusively by the technocratic superstate. At a certain point, these two branches of the technocratic movement, exoteric and esoteric, will be fused together. When this finally occurs, human civilization will be reborn into a radically new era of evolutionary development as far as the governance of civilization is concerned. The all-pervading culture of secrecy and operational compartmentalization that characterizes the national security state makes it an ideal environment to layer these two different tiers of technocracy atop each other, with the outer exoteric concept masking the inner esoteric vision. The latter is deliberately made invisible to the former, meaning the esoteric is made invisible to the exoteric, a dynamic that gives the technocratic superstate, or the esoteric aspect, an opportunity to penetrate the operations of the exoteric technocratic system being put into place by deep state strategists like Brzezinski. Hope you're following. At the heart of this operation is the central think tank situated at the apex of the technocratic superstate. It is the ultimate mastermind behind the technocratic movement, using its information advantage to re-engineer the global architecture of human civilization, pulling it out of nation states and capitalism and moving it towards global government and technocracy. Around this central think tank are extended numerous peripheral spokes which represent various compartmentalized operation units, each specialized within a particular domain of activity. The central hub/think tank aspect of this institution sets policies and regulations across the entire system, coordinating the various peripheral spokes together so that they operate in unison. To draw an analogy, the technocratic superstate's model of governance operates similarly to how the brain functions in the body. The brain acts as the cognitive hub of the body, with its orders and directives moving down into different specialized appendages of it, activating them and coordinating their behavior. The brain also receives information feedback from these appendages by means of the extended nervous system. This feedback is computed by the central brain, influencing its future directives moving back down into the appendages. So there's both a bottom-up and top-down dynamic with the nervous system. So I think this is more or less how the think tank at the core of the technocratic superstate operates. It's like a brain driving the development of the entire social technocratic organism, shaping the behavior of every part of its sociological/anatomical body, in the same way that, by analogy, the nervous system and the brain do with the physical body. One of the primary benefits that the hub and spoke model provides to the technocratic superstate is that it allows secrecy to be maintained across the entire social order, with only its central think tank having access to the full spectrum of knowledge about etheric energy and what the final technocratic endgame entails, including what the final blueprint for global technocracy looks like, what the greatest secrets about etheric energy are, and what types of technologies are able to be engineered based on man's ability to tap into this atmospheric energy source. So having a hub and spoke model allows the greatest secrets to be consolidated at the core. And so to perform their various functions, the different outer appendages don't need to know the inner secrets. So in sum, the technocratic superstate is organized around a hidden apex think tank, which resides at the concealed inner core of the U.S. national security state. This think tank is working to guide the evolution of human civilization, pulling it toward the creation of a single consolidated system of global government featuring etheric energy as its primary fuel source. The technocratic superstate's ability to pursue this agenda faces serious constraints, however. It can't openly issue directives to the deep state power factions that run America's global empire, nor can it openly regulate their behavior. Instead, it must always act in the shadows, exerting its influence covertly from behind a complex array of front organizations, intermediaries, and proxies. So that's what secrecy demands, is this network of front organizations, intermediaries, and proxies. And so not only does the technocratic superstate have the equivalent of that, but then at another level, the deep state has their own equivalent of organizations, intermediaries, and proxies because it is running a secret empire in relation to the outer public. So the outer public is locked on the level of nation states, and it perceives nation states interacting with each other. The empire is like an umbrella over the nation states, but the public isn't really thinking about this empire. They're thinking more of the nation state. So they're wondering why are the nation states so unresponsive to the citizens? Why is the corruption so endemic across the world? Well, that's the presence of the empire, but people don't have the intellectual narrative and the story in place to understand that empire. And that's what I try to do in the book, particularly the first section of it, the first 4 chapters. It's all about the rise of that empire. And so the idea that America plays host to not only a nation state, but also a global empire that is rooted out of the military industrial complex, but operates largely through soft power means via corporations, international governments, organizations, NGOs, things of that manner. That's how the secret empire is run. So we have 2 secret systems of government, really. We have the deep state and then the technocratic superstate. So in order to preserve its secrecy while at the same time exerting its influence on society, the technocratic superstate must work through an extended network of proxies strategically located in a variety of key social sectors. These are used to manipulate each social sector and play governments, NGOs, banks, and corporations off each other. This is done according to a calculated formula designed to fulfill a 3-fold final endgame: the creation of global government, the shift into technocracy, and the revelation or public release of etheric energy technologies and science. Because the hidden hand orchestrating this social engineering operation, the technocratic superstate, must keep its operations secret, each chess piece on its chessboard is automatically given a limited degree of autonomy, which means that if you're using proxies and cutouts, strategically that's helpful for you on one hand because you can accomplish goals through them without publicly revealing yourself. The problem is those proxies and cutouts have a degree of autonomy because you can't fully regulate their behavior. Otherwise, you no longer are a secret to them. So you have to live with certain externalities or behavioral consequences of the partners that you're partnering with. And so inevitably you get blowback. And there's all these cases from the history of American empire of this happening. So that's how the secrecy corrupts the system. You can't have a well-functioning society or a well-functioning individual whose mind is completely compartmentalized and driven by secrecy, because all these shadow compulsions and all these extreme elements from within are going to be lashing out. The light from within can't reach the shadow elements. That's why they're prospering. The only way you can get that light into those areas to heal them is to unwind the secrecy and compartmentalization. So the technocratic superstate can't afford to expose itself in order to regulate or censure the activities of the deep state institutions like the CIA or Federal Reserve. Instead, it must rely on subversive social engineering techniques to shape the behavior of these deep state apparatuses in the pursuit of its own long-term goals. Many, if not all, the deep state power structures that the technocratic superstate partners with hold their own imperialistic ambitions and engage in predatory behavior that clashes with the technocratic superstate's long-term endgame. But since the technocratic superstate must maintain its secrecy and independence, it cannot directly impose its will to censure the behavior of these deep state actors. In the unsupervised environment that results, these factions tend to engage in predatory behavior against the populace, creating great hardship for society. Operating outside of regulatory oversight and liberated from any reforms that the constitutional government or technocratic superstate might attempt to enforce upon it, the deep state becomes a favored target by what Carl Jung termed the collective shadow. In other words, it becomes dominated by shadow elements located within an invisible depth dimension of the human psyche, i.e. the collective unconscious. In an environment where critical truths about reality, such as the existence of the ether, have been kept secret, false narratives have emerged in their place. This is the perfect condition for the collective shadow to rise up and exert its influence, corrupting the behavior of all those left to fend for themselves in the dark. This dynamic helps explain the misanthropic and predatory behavior exhibited by so many factions of the U.S. deep state, from the capitalist oligarchy to the CIA to the military-industrial complex. In the absence of truth, each is unable to properly regulate its behavior. This leads to a massive outbreak of shadow complexes, creating a widespread social sickness that cannot be cured until the secrecy around etheric energy can be finally dissolved. The light of truth has the power to dispel the shadow that now darkens the behavior of the elite power factions running the American empire. But before the grand revelation of the ether can be accomplished, 2 key requirements must first be met. First, a technocratic operating system must be fully installed, given that this is the only economic model capable of safely harnessing etheric energy. Second, the era of competing nation states must come to an end, with a unified system of global government rising to take its place or replace it. because you can't have competing nation states using these technologies against each other. So once these requirements have been met, the hidden light of the ether can be revealed and the shadow's grip on our civilization dispelled. The time when this will finally occur is likely not far off. Let us hope it is soon, because until that happens, the conditions for the upwelling of the collective shadow through the body of American empire will continue to occur, leaving much pain, suffering, and death in its wake. And that's the end of that section. Again, that was called the Technocracy's Hub and Spoke Model. So let's just move into the last section. It's not that long. It's called the International Rules-Based Order. And this is the seat of where this technocratic transition is taking place. At least the exoteric transition from capitalism into technocracy is taking place primarily via the International Rules-Based Order, which from the beginning was like the seat of American empire. American empire is not just hard power. Its hegemony is also expressed through soft power, control of corporations, banks, international governance institutions, NGOs, all that stuff. So that's how it exerts influence on the global order. But this apparatus, this international rules-based order, is the ideal place for the technocratic superstate to focus its work on, to gradually, covertly re-engineer this in the direction that it needs it to go if it's ever going to reveal the secrets that it possesses. So let's jump into this, the international rules-based order. In the previous chapter, I discussed the historical circumstances that led to the initial founding of the technocratic superstate, arguing that it was formed out of necessity arising from the need to monopolize all research into the classified science of etheric energy. Not only would foreign nations need to be kept ignorant of the discovery of this transformative new paradigm of physics, but so would the American populace, its capitalist ruling class, i.e. the oligarchy, its overt scientists and engineers, and the military strategists behind its global empire. In short, the science of etheric energy must be kept hidden from everyone, with the technocratic superstate retaining exclusive control over it, while positioning itself to subtly engineer the trajectory of global civilization in the direction of globalism, global government, and technocracy. The original body of the technocratic superstate would have begun small, like a seed. Over time, the seed would have sprouted and grown, rising in power, influence, and reach until it became the dominant driving force in global affairs. All the while, it would remain hidden and throned at the mysterious center of America's vast military-industrial complex. From this elite vantage point, it extended peripheral spokes into every sector of society, which provided it with data about the entire social organism and offered a means to influence the behavior of each sector of society from within, driving each in the common direction of global technocracy. Because technocracy is so important to the core mission of the technocratic superstate, from the very beginning it had to commit to operating entirely in the dark, functioning almost like a secret society. Not only has it been able to mask its operations behind the technocratic superstate's culture of secrecy and compartmentalization, it has also leveraged the empire's reliance on soft power techniques, which include the use of financial, corporate, diplomatic, cultural, and psychological techniques to express hegemonic supremacy over foreign nations and basically the global population. While the American empire maintains a military or hard power superiority over its rivals, much of its influence and control is expressed through its soft power domination of global finance, trade, diplomacy, and culture. One of the ways it wields its soft power weaponry is to shape narratives about the American empire, framing it as something benevolent, altruistic, and not, in fact, an empire at all. To mask its true imperial intentions, much of America's hegemony over the world system is expressed through what's termed the International Rules-Based Order. Officially, the International Rules-Based Order was created to promote pluralism, facilitate international trade, and advance the spread of liberal, democratic values across the world. It is centered around a suite of multilateral institutions, treaties, and norms that America has systematically maneuvered into place over the course of the 20th century, including the United Nations, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, and regional alliances like NATO. In theory, the IRBO, or International Rules-Based Order, represents a rules-based system where all nations participate as equal actors and which is dedicated to fostering cooperation, peace, and economic development by setting standards for everything from trade policy and military alliances to human rights and environmental regulations. In practice, however, it functions as a framework for the American empire to enforce geopolitical dominance, promote neoliberal economic policies, and shape the internal affairs of foreign nations under the guise of global stewardship. There's a close link between the IRBO and the hegemonic expansion of American capitalism, which is centered around the Federal Reserve banking cartel. As Council of Foreign Relations member Stuart Patrick describes it, One of the main functions of the IRBO is to protect, preserve, and defend the regimes of the capitalist world economy. This involves pressing for liberalization and maintaining an open market, supplying a freely convertible international currency, managing exchange rates, providing liquidity, serving as a lender of last resort, and supporting international investment and development. So just to put in context, I'm describing the build out of the international rules-based order and the different stakeholders involved. On one hand, global capitalism is heavily involved in it, and on another level, the American empire uses it as its soft power platform. So supporting the hegemony of American capitalism is what analyst Ian Davis describes a truly global network of corporations, think tanks, private foundations, international government organizations, NGOs, and governments. These work in partnership with Americans' hard power superiority to solidify America's claim as global hegemon. Overall, the IRBO is a system designed to support the global empire, roping every foreign nation into its net and giving them no choice but to play by America's rules. It is an ideal system within which to perform a gradual social engineering operation on the globe, in other words. By incrementally tilting the IRBO in the direction of technocracy, the American empire can exert a simultaneous influence upon every nation within its orbit, pulling them all in the same direction in lockstep coordination. Of course, COVID was a case study in that. By exerting a targeted, albeit covert influence upon the various international stakeholders that comprise the IRBO, the technocratic superstate is able to efficiently engineer the world system in the direction of technocracy and global government. Eventually, the entire system will be formally transitioned into a global technocratic governance system managed at its highest level by an elite think tank. According to my theory, this revolution in global governance will coincide with a long-awaited energy revolution involving etheric energy. For over a century, the technocratic superstate has kept this scientific program under wraps, preserving it until such time that a global technocratic governance system could formally be installed, one specially designed to handle the unique challenges it poses and opportunities it offers. We'll talk about the scientific paradigm. The day is fast approaching when the foundations for this global technocratic governance system will be completed. This opens the door for the externalization of the technocratic superstate and the subsequent public revelation of the etheric energy paradigm of science and tech it has been sequestering. These two motions, global technocracy and etheric energy, are the two key ingredients that will fuel civilization's rebirth into a new age of development. For decades, the technocratic superstate has engineered the IRBO, or International Rules-Based Order, to set the stage for their eventual synthesis. One might argue that the series of events that have taken place since the year 2020 have marked the formal hard launch of this initiative. These include the announcement of the WEF's Great Reset Initiative, the progression of the internet, robotics, and AI-driven Fourth Industrial Revolution, the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, quote-unquote, and the announcement by international central banking cartels to shift the globe into a central bank digital currency regime. These trends are coinciding with the outbreak of a series of global crises, some natural, like environmental degradation, others deliberately instigated, like the immigration crisis in the West. Together, in classic shock doctrine fashion, these are working to quicken the pace of global transformation. Meanwhile, at the same time, we also find the U.S. government soft-launching the disclosure of its long history of involvement with the UFO phenomenon. This is no coincidence. When you pull the string on the UFO thread, it inevitably brings you to the technocratic superstate and the classified science of etheric energy and this whole backstory involving the shift globally into technocracy. So what better time for this concealed history about UFOs to be revealed than on the cusp of the International Rule-Based Order's formal transition towards world government and technocracy? So that's the key thing, is that the motion towards globalization and technocracy that we're seeing is coinciding with not only the revelation of much of the corruption about the deep state worldwide, like everybody's kind of tuned in to the corruption now of the leadership class of the world, and that really took off since 2020, especially. But at the same time, we're also seeing the externalization of this UFO program, which, officially is trying to be tied to an alien presence or whatever. But as you know from, my book and my other work, that I don't believe in aliens, and I feel like this is all a story about the mysteries of human history and the world system that we inhabit. And so this is where we are. It's thematically or archetypally a time of apocalyptic revelation in which all these unseen, hidden dimensions and aspects are being revealed to our consciousness. And so this is a part of a stage in our human growth and evolution. And all the stuff I'm talking about in this chapter, these sociological changes taking place to global civilization and different power dynamics and stuff, all that stuff is really just expressions of mankind evolving. And this is the story of how mankind evolves, is we have to go kicking and screaming through our own development. And, we learn through experience. So we are entering, as I say in the conclusion of this book, we're entering a period of trial by fire or baptism by fire, in which the fire really represents experience. And so, all the impurities are going to be burned off through the crucible of going through these intense experiences. And these intense experiences, the root cause of them is all within ourselves. Everything that's happening, it's all humans behind it. So the mystery of the human being is really the central mystery here, as the central question in this story, is particularly psychologically. It's humans behaving in certain ways, and we're trying to figure out what that is. Well, if you don't have a theory of mind, then you can't possibly answer that question. And so that's one of the things that is kind of waiting to break through in the public zeitgeist and the Overton window, so to speak, is an actual realistic assessment of what human psychology is, because it's not confined purely to the individual level, and it is not confined purely to the brain. So anyway, lots more to discuss, but we're in this today with that note. So that finishes off this chapter 6, which is Technocracy, Government in the Scientific Age. And the chapter 7 that follows is called The Technocratic Agenda Behind World War II. And then, we go from there and talk about how all these motions that I talked about in theory in this chapter that we just discussed, how these actually played out in the story of the last 100 years of history. So World War II is the centerpiece of a lot of this story. And I talked about some of that in this episode. But yeah, that's it for today. So everybody, thanks for tuning back in. Again, this is the Wisdom Nutrition Podcast. I'm Alex Sakin, and God bless.